Blog Talk Radio.
From everyone here at the Rift Radio Network and our CEO, John Covey, would like to welcome you to tonight's special broadcast. This work is protected by Creative Commons license. And now, a word from our sponsors.
Presenting travel writer and sacred mysterious site hunter, Teal Gray. Teal, what's on for tonight?
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Superstitious Texas. This is Teal Gray, and I am really excited about tonight's guest, Snider, because we're going to talk about all things cemetery, superstitious, you name it, we're going to cover it. I want to talk to you a little bit about Superstitious Texas Mysteries series that is coming out. I know a lot of people are excited about it, and it's still on track to be out this month. I am doing this podcast will still go on as it does, but also besides the Superstitious Texas book, A to Z Superstitions, that will come out separately later this year, there is going to be a Superstitious Texas mystery series. And that's going to take, there's going to be sort of a mysterious place. It's going to be set up where all these mysteries will take place, and instead of it just being stories of fiction, while that is going to be the key element, I will be bringing on real-life guests onto those mysteries and those books, and so we're going to combine a little bit of something that hasn't been done before in that way. So the first book is going to be, as I said, out later this month, and in fact, our guest tonight, Snider, is going to be the first real-life person that is going to be featured in our mystery book series. So that's going to be kind of fun. And everything I talk about, you know, in Superstitious Texas about everything being a melting pot and of all the different nationalities and folklore and all of that, well, we're going to take those elements and put that in the book. So the one main meeting place for everything is going to be the Melting Pot Diner. And so, you know, all these elements are going to kind of come to life in the books and that play out here live on the podcast and in life with some of our real live guests. So that'll be kind of a fun thing. And I'm glad so many people have been in contact with me, and they're excited about that too. So just wanted to clear that up because so many people wanted to be sure that the show was still going to go on, and it absolutely will be on every week. So let me talk to you a little bit about our guest, Snider, and I'm going to have her come on here in just a minute and talk about her new book that is coming out, and there's a way for you to get that early bird special still. So we'll and it's Grave Goods. So let me introduce her now so she can tell us all about her. Snider, welcome to the show.
Well, hey there, hi there, ho there. I am so excited to be here with you today. And you know what? Before I tell people a little more about me and my upcoming book, I just want to say that I absolutely love the idea of being a real-life character in your Superstitious Mystery series. I'm like really honored. I think that's going to be so fun. Now, just don't kill me off, okay?
No, we'll keep you. We'll keep you alive so you can pop in on different books and things that come through. I just thought, you know, I love to do things that haven't been done before or integrate things that, you know, maybe break a little bit of the rules. But I think it's fun. I think it's going to be great, you know, and it just makes a fictitious place come to life in my mind, you know, and we have so many great things that happen in real life. It's going to be fun to integrate those into the book.
And I won't have to tell my friends, oh, this scene here, this actually happened, because you'll be using my real name. Because a lot of times, you read a book, and then you read, and when you do get to talk to the author, and you're like, what, did any of this was based on real life? Oh, yeah, this scene here was based on this thing that happened with me and a friend. And so this way, you'll just actually have what happened, and that'll be fun. They'll wonder more like, did she embellish it? Did that really happen in that way? So I think it's just going to be a good time. It's really going to be fun. I can hardly wait. I didn't realize
my cat in the book, I have a big black Maine Coon cat named Jack. And so you're going to also in the book be bringing your real life kitty, Miss Otis, who you in fact adopted from a haunted location you were staying at. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So the cats are going to be part of it. We're going to be part of it. And hopefully they don't upstage us too much,
Oh yeah, and I have to clarify. She adopted me. It was so crazy. I actually was meditating under this big pecan tree in the morning, and like when I was done, I just said out loud, like, because I was there for that writing residency, so I was there alone, and I said to myself, gosh, the only thing missing. This place is great. I sure wish I had a kitty here. I miss my cat, and I looked at the tree and I said, hey, could you send me a cat? And I forgot about it. And then that evening, careful what you wish for. I didn't wish for a pot of gold, in retrospect, but I was sitting on the back porch and I was trying to play that song, Miss Otis by Cole Porter. And I look up and this cat, like from quite a distance, just zeroes in on me. It just comes charging over. She was still a kitten, and she just came running up onto the, the porch and just was like, you're mine, lady. And but it is fun. I'm totally honored that Miss Otis is going to be. She's all tucked in. I have to get her all settled before. When I start talking a lot and staring at the computer, she gets excited. Oh, you're going to be on the radio. So if you hear her meow, she might put in her 2 cents.
And you got to bring a ukulele, into the scenes. We're going to have at the melting pot, on Saturday nights, we all get together and we have open mic. So, that's got to be part of it.
Oh, that's just too much fun. Yeah, I love it already. That's just going to be a blast. Oh, well. All right.
I'm looking forward to it. So let everybody know. Let's talk about Tui Snider. Let them know a little bit about you and your what you do and what you love.
Okay.
Which, let me give you guys a hint. It's cemeteries. And then about your new book coming out and how they can get onto that early special.
Oh, yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I am Tui Snider, and I know that some of you probably recognize my voice out there because a couple of weeks ago I hosted for you when you weren't here one night. And also I used to co-host with you sometimes in the past, and so kind of your sidekick, I think people are thinking
definitely
Teal Gray, they might think, oh yeah, or Tui, that's sort of association. There's a little association there. But for those of you who are new listeners and might not know who I am, I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a photographer. I just love writing books. I do specialize in historic cemeteries, cemetery symbolism, also haunted places and overlooked history. Those are just things I really love digging into. There's a lot of goodies along that line here in Texas. You got a whole show, Superstitious Texas, and you haven't run out of anything, nor will you. In fact, I sometimes joke. Yeah, I actually joke that I used to write fiction, but then I moved to Texas, and I just have been so inspired by all the amazing history that people have here, that this state has, that I have not been able to quit writing about it. I do have a few books about cemeteries. I have one called Understanding Cemetery Symbols, and as you might have guessed from the title, no shocker, it's about how to understand cemetery symbols, and many of which have become forgotten over the years. And our ancestors were quite different than we are. Even 100 years ago, there was quite a different mindset, and people were more poetic and knew how to use symbols. I made a graveyard journal, and for people who want to keep track of the cemeteries they go to, and that's been surprisingly popular. I think it's because genealogists actually like to write things down. I have a little coming out hopefully later this year. It's called 6 Feet Under Texas, and this is a fun collection of unique cemetery monuments and grave sites that you could actually visit here in Texas that have unusual stories behind them, like a mausoleum where the guy had a phone line installed for a few days after he passed away, so he could call and things like that.
Just in case.
But, yeah, just in case. I know, the things people do. And so that's a really fun one. But I also have a brand new book, and it's currently available on pre-order on Amazon. It was a book I kind of had in the works in the background, but then when this whole, pandemic came out, and we were all, I channeled all my energy into just getting this book together. And I really listened to what my readers had been asking for. They had been wanting more photos, like really nice color photos. So the book is called Grave Goods, and it's the meaning of stones, coins, seashells, and other items in historic cemeteries. And it has over 50 photos in it. And I did cover this topic briefly in my book, Understanding Cemetery Symbols, but in this new book, I really develop it and go into more detail about the origins of why you see these things and what they mean. And then plus I have over 50 full-colored pictures in it, and a lot of them are from Texas, but I also have pictures from Australia, Argentina, England, all over the place, places I've been. So if you are someone who enjoys learning about historic cemeteries, and you might be since you are listening to this show, this is not a cooking show, then I invite you to go and pre-order Grave Goods, because like Teal mentioned earlier, I do have an early bird special going on. And what this is whenever I put out a book, I always put it on pre-order and then put the price as low as Amazon will let me, because I like to reward anybody who wants to invest in me and like buy a book on pre-order, because it helps me to launch my book when you do that. So it's my way of rewarding you guys, and it's just sort of fun. So right now I do have the book Grave Goods. It's on Amazon. It's only $1.99. It's the cheapest I could put it. I wanted 99 cents, but it's a really big file thanks to all those photos. But hey, once the book comes out, I'm going to boost that price. So you want to grab it now if you're interested in this topic. The other thing I'd like to mention while I've got your ear is that this month I'm adding a lot of new cemetery symbol articles to my website. There's this thing called the April A to Z blog challenge. And so you put up a blog post to go with each letter. So I had for A, I wrote about the symbology of anchors. And it's not sailors. You might think that right off the bat. There's a lot more to anchors, surprisingly. It's an ancient Christian symbol. I have another one that's about why do saints and angels so often have bare feet? There's an interesting reason for that. And I just kind of working my way through the alphabet. I'm behind a couple letters right now, but I'll be catching up soon, so don't worry. And one more thing too, I have been posting some virtual cemetery tours over on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. So that's been a lot of fun. You can either type my name into YouTube and find it, or you can go to my website, Snider, and I have links, I think at the bottom of the page, that go to my YouTube channel. So there you go. I think I've introduced myself in great detail.
Well, that's good, though. I love that because, so many times people, when you hear them or they're interviewed or something, they don't have that opportunity for people to get to know them a little bit. So I always like to give you a little time to talk to the listeners and let them know, because it's a global show. So everybody gets to know us and gets to be, longtime listeners. And so we want everybody to know who you are. And then also that'll make it easy for them to catch up with the book, right?
That's right. Definitely.
That's good. Well, obviously, having you on tonight, we are going to be talking about cemetery superstitions. And I love superstitions. And I just grew up with them, and that's what makes, the reason I created the show and the books that are coming up is because my life has always just been filled with them. But nobody, not everybody in the family thought of them so much as superstitions. It just was, right? It's just fact. It's just how it is and what you do. And I just think it's great, and I love all the different cultures and to see, the similarities and also sometimes the differences in cultures, from everything from what's a lucky number, to, anything like colors and all this sort of thing, because it's different in different places,
Well,
but
even like
things,
for you grew up in Texas, and I grew up in Virginia and Washington State. So maybe I heard I'm curious tonight, maybe we will have, heard variations or like different ones that we grew up with, because I did include ones that I really dug back and thought, what did I hear when I was a kid? So I'm really looking forward to that tonight.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. So I just, we'll start off, and we can go back and forth, but I just want to start off with some of the things that are a little bit common questions that I get for people who ask me about superstitions when it comes to death and, burials. I have my book, as you know, and you did a really excellent interview of me. Thank you so much recently. And about the book coming up, Forget Me Not, Memento Mori, A Worldview. And so people are just really curious, and it is very interesting. It's not morbid, honestly, when you get into the subject. I know some people, off the hand might think, oh, gosh, it's so morbid, all this talk of tombstones and cemeteries and death and burials. But it's really fascinating because it gives you a different, in my perspective, and certainly in the book, mine's written very much with everybody's religious beliefs and also what is common to them in their locale or their country, and some of those things are very specific due to where they live. So, one thing is pallbearers, okay? Now, why do pallbearers wear gloves? Well, they're responsible for carrying the casket, but why the gloves? So this funeral superstition can be traced back to the Victorian era, like so many things, and that was filled with innovation and discovery, but also of fear of the dead. During that time, the British Empire watched as Queen Victoria mourned her late husband, families mourned the death of their loved ones who died of unknown or incurable diseases, and there was a widespread fear of being buried alive, very widespread. And so, society was comforted by spirituality. Christianity now preached that once someone died, their spirit was released from the earthly vessel, but to where? Did the spirit stay with their bodies? Did they roam the cemeteries? Could a deceased person's spirit inhabit your body? These were questions that led to a number of strange superstitions about funeral ceremony. And it was widely believed that actually touching the casket with your bare fingers, your hand, would allow the spirit of the deceased to enter your body. So as a precaution, pallbearers were required to wear gloves. And people believed a similar funeral superstition that opening your mouth to yawn could allow a spirit to enter and inhabit your body. So they were very careful about those things. Now, have you heard those, Tui?
Yeah, I have a little bit, and when you were mentioning that about wearing gloves, it did remind me about how there is a tradition that even predates, like goes earlier than the Victorian era, where once the pallbearers had the coffin or casket in their hands, they should never set it down. So not only were they having to wear gloves or not, but if they weren't allowed to touch it, let it set down on the ground. And if they did, the spirit might get out and just wander off and maybe come back and bug people, which seems to be a real concern a lot. So over in Europe, there are actually some old roads that were just used for going to the grave, like they're grave roads and or coffin roads. And along the way, some of them will have like a big rock along the way. And nowadays, if you were just hiking along these little trails, you might think, oh, what a quaint little place here. Well, that big rock there might have been a coffin rest, a place to give the pallbearers a break. Like, okay, whoops, let's put this heavy thing down for a minute, catch our breath, and then keep going. So I thought that was kind of fun. I would like to now go and walk around some coffin rests.
Sometimes a long walk. So, I mean, they're heavy. Not to be too graphic about it, but in this time, I'm trying to be really sensitive with these shows because, we're in a pandemic and there's so many people that are losing, loved ones. And in fact, that's why I have put on hold my Memento Mori show on Monday nights for a while. I'm going to leave that be until the fall. And, I just want to be sensitive to everybody. But just the physical lifting of it, and it's heavy. And as you say, in the past, it isn't like now where it's I wouldn't say just largely symbolic, but it is in no way the length that you would carry a casket now into a church or anything like that. It was a lot more involved in the past, and certainly in country situations and different things like that. It was, they were looking for a little spot, but they were also very much entrenched in their belief system, and so there was all these things to think about. And
Well,
one of them.
I wanted to bring up. I wanted to back up. One thing I wanted to mention too, because you mentioned earlier that people may be thinking it's morbid to be curious or so interested in cemeteries and headstones and all that. And I just wanted to point out something I like to remind people of that's become very forgotten in our modern era is that cemeteries are not for the dead; they are for the living. I mean, yes, that is where we take our dead. That's where we leave our dead. Okay, but depending on your belief system, we can't prove what happens. But the cemetery itself, those burial grounds, are meant to comfort us, the living. So they are meant for us to go there. It's just we've gotten out of that habit. And now we all go, a lot of us go, and we just don't even know what to do with ourselves in the cemetery. We're afraid to touch anything or do, we don't know the etiquette, so we're just afraid. And then we fall back on, we don't know, how to behave. But they are there to comfort us.
Yeah, and that's and they do, and it's very different the way they are now as to what they were, in their inception, because people did not think of it morbid at all. They packed up everybody and they went and had their lunch and visited Grandpa or whoever was out there, and it was very much a continued relationship with the person who had passed on. And not to say that we don't still have that, but we don't necessarily have that same lifestyle that they did once, where a lot of the families lived together or close and they had a lot of time together to where they could do that. Now, very much people are spread apart. They don't not necessarily live in the same house or anything. But back in the day, it was not uncommon for somebody to live all in this big house or on a farm or something. And then when their loved one passed, that body, would be in that house for mourning, and people would come to visit, and then the body would be, they would have the wakes, and then they'd have the watches kind of thing, and then the body would be taken there to be buried. And so it was something where, you lived with the family, you died there, and then you were just continued on to be visited. So it was just a little closer knit, I guess you would say, than it is now. Things have become so sanitized in so many ways that we don't have that same connection that we did at one time. So, that also puts in place a distance. And over time, where you don't handle the bodies like you used to, now there are certain situations where people are getting back to that and back to the more natural burials and all the different ways that you can be buried now. But overall, a person dies many times in a hospital or a nursing home, not at home. So the body is never washed and dressed and on display in the home they lived in. That's just not common now. And, it's also not as common for everybody to gather at the grave and have lunch or something. It's just something that doesn't happen. It's not that it's worse. It's just different. It's not, one thing's not better or I'm not trying to say that it was better in the old days, but it just was different. And it seems like there was a very close-knit situation to where it just never entered their minds of it being like creepy or morbid. It was just their loved one, So I think sometimes distance can put verbiage in place that kind of makes you go, but if you look at anything when the time it was happening. So, what we're talking about and a lot of these superstitions and things might not be common now, but back in the day, very much in the forefront of their thinking, and in fact, even no, go ahead.
I was going to say, sometimes the superstitions linger, or the rituals linger, and we've kind of forgotten why they were originally, why they originally happened. But they still stretch right into modern day, like, still wearing, like you mentioned, still wearing gloves, pallbearers. Well, most people, 99% of the people have forgotten why. So it's really fun to look in and figure out what was the reason for that originally. So I think that's really great.
Yeah, I mean, I do too, because they do it without thinking, just knowing that that's proper etiquette. But I love the backstory of everything. You know that I'm a very curious cat. So I think it's very interesting. And I really do think the majority of people are interested in it as well, you know.
But it's like I just thought of one, like something. Oh, sorry, I just interrupted you. I just had one little thought. Okay, so like one thing that I thought was kind of cool is that there's a tradition of having the headlights on when you drive to a cemetery, when you're on a funeral. You know, the procession. A lot of people will turn their headlights on. Certainly, the hearses often do. And this actually dates back to ancient Rome, and the word funeral comes from the word funeralis, which means torch. And they used to have their burials at night, and they would lead the way with a torch. And so by turning the headlights on, it's kind of a throwback to that day when that time. So it's funny that turning the headlights on is a tradition that dates back. You know, the headlights of your car is a tradition that could date back so far.
All roads lead to Rome, right?
There you go. You know? There you go.
Well, a lot of superstitions, even about where the direction of the cemetery plots were placed. So have you ever noticed that most cemetery graves face east? Well, there are many explanations for this, but the most popular one relates back to the religious belief that the dead will be called to rise again and receive judgment. Jewish and Christian tradition states that God will call the dead to rise to the east. They were not the first to perpetuate this belief, but these religions were some of the first to organize and manage cemeteries. Therefore, them creating the tradition of facing graves to the east. Now, this belief can also be traced back to pagan traditions and worship of the sun. The east represents new life and a new day. The west represents an ending. So their deceased were buried east to west to represent a full life. And they have risen like the sun and will one day rise again. And the majority of modern cemeteries continue this east to west tradition. So that's something that a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, and I have a few comments on this because, I get asked about this a lot, and I try to keep track of it when I go to cemeteries. And it really is interesting because in the 1830s, that's when the garden cemeteries became a thing. And that's when people, those were America's first public parks, and people would go to them on the weekend and do things that we talk about picnicking in graveyards, cemeteries. People would actually, they would be running around playing games. They'd have carriage races. There'd be artists there, with their easels. And it was really a place to see and be seen because cities didn't have public parks yet at that time. So these garden cemeteries kind of went against that whole east to west thing because they were all inspired by Père Lachaise in France. And the whole idea was they hired these landscape architects, I can't say the word, architects, sorry, to create these like landscapes like you would see in paintings. And so because of that, they would make these winding paths through the cemetery, and that's when a lot of those people aren't buried precisely east-west. So it starts to really vary in those type of cemeteries. So it is interesting. However, even today there are people who feel very strongly about being buried east-west, and there is a place in Louisiana, there's a Catholic cemetery where they run, for whatever reason, nobody knows why. It's about like the oldest burial is maybe 100 or 200 years old there, but it runs north-south. So either someone had their directions wrong or whatever, but it's like people still mutter. It's considered scandalous. People still mutter about it. And even in a few years ago in Wales, there is a town that I can't pronounce that has a graveyard that I also equally unpronounceable. It's all full of consonants.
That's true with Wales.
Yeah, it's just use your imagination. I don't know, the Welsh town or whatever. But the local people there were upset that there were some graveyards, some plots that ran north to south, and they complained, and they made sure that, okay, if you really want to go east to west, we will do that for you. But and now I do get curious as to why in this era people still would feel so strongly about the east-west tradition, because in the past, as you mentioned, it tied into, especially with Christianity, you want to be facing east, when Gabriel blows his trumpet on Judgment Day. Although I have heard sometimes ministers, they would want to be have their head facing east so that they could be facing their flock like, so the other people in their congregation they'd be ready to, lead their congregation on Judgment Day. But it is really interesting, that whole idea of the east to west. And then I don't know if you'd heard I had read that our ancestors, if someone was on their deathbed, their actual physical bed that they were not doing so well in didn't face east-west, they would orient the bed. They would actually turn the bed to face east-west, because they felt that would somehow make their transition into the afterlife easier, which I thought that was really interesting too.
Well, actually it's a feng shui practice. I always face my bed.
Oh, wow.
And it's a real problem to me if I have a room, I've had rooms that I've reworked to where I'm facing east, or, the bed would have to be to where I'm looking out a window that's facing east. It's just a feng shui thing, and it goes back, centuries. And it does work with the chi, the flow of the body. So actually that practice of moving a sick bed or anything to face east would change the energy and flow in the room to the person, and it would be beneficial. So it is beneficial to have your bed to where you are facing east. So I always do that, And a lot of times if people are having trouble sleeping, or they're having problems in their relationships, change that bed, face it to east. And if you want to have children or make the relationship even stronger, you put an iron rod underneath the bed. So that's a little. It gives strength.
When you said about the iron, when Larry and I, we got married at the Scarborough Renaissance Fair in Waxahachie, Texas, and we were married in costume. Of course, it's a Renaissance Fair, like I said, so we were in costume. But we literally tied the knot and over an anvil, an iron anvil. And Larry had made the anvil, and oh my gosh, that thing was just so heavy. But yeah, they had the anvil there, and we tied the Archbishop of Canterbury guy. He read our vows and actually tied the knot. So yeah, I didn't know that about that makes sense, and that's the reason you tie the knot over the iron to make it strong.
You want to, and you would want to ideally take that home, and if it fit underneath the marriage bed, all the better. Another thing that is different to what we're talking about, but still something about facing east. I have been blessed on several of my radio shows and paramysteries, particularly, to interview some of the great minds in all their fields. And some people that I've interviewed about, aliens and abductions and cattle mutilations and things like this, they have left me very sleepless. So even facing east isn't helping sometimes when I talk to these people. But one thing that they've told me, and I've been told this by several people who, trust me, know their stuff, that the cattle, when they find them mutilated, the heads, they're always facing east.
Oh yeah, I remember you telling me that. Oh.
Yeah, and these are ones truly who have been, this is not just hearsay. These are people who are at the top of their field. They're the ones that get the phone call and go out and investigate this. And most of them in law enforcement. So this is not just people, running around in their trucks looking for stuff. And there's no blood. There's no disturbance around the animals. There's just a big mystery of what's going on here, but they're facing east. So
that whole cattle mutilation, they freak me out, and I know someone in the Fish and Wildlife Service who actually forwards me stuff every now and then when that's going on, and this person doesn't know what it's all about either, and they're a little for them to forward me stuff means that this isn't just some weird thing, but I should ask them about the whole East thing, what they know about that. That's so weird.
Because something's happening. I mean, something's happening. It's not a hoax. It's not. This is global, everybody. This is a thing. But just to make you sleep with a flashlight tonight. Just, think about that. So,
well, you just reminded me because one of the superstitions that I've heard of before is if you hear a cow mooing after midnight, it's bad luck. So now I'm thinking
you know what? And I would say you need to go see what's going on, because really there's, that goes into the other superstition where people will say nothing good happens after midnight. Like, their whole point is like everything should be locked up, stay in and let it go. But truly, things get weird the later it gets. There's just something to that. But that's something. And another thing. So while we're on to the to the actual cemetery, headstones were created because of a superstition. A common belief across Christianity and Islam and Judaism is that at the end of days, the dead will rise for judgment and enter into the next life. So Europeans in the 1500s believed it to be that it was true, and they were afraid of the dead rising too early. And to alleviate their fears, they placed large headstones above where the deceased's head was resting to keep the body from roaming the earth ahead of schedule. And in some English cemeteries, the headstones were placed at the feet of the deceased as well to prevent them from getting up and walking away. Earlier generations of Anglo-Saxons were also concerned about the potential of the deceased coming back to life and roaming the earth. And according to the book Anglo-Saxon Deviant Burial Customs, they used to cut the feet off of their deceased to prevent this. And also you will see huge, huge blocks that are put over people. And that goes back, we won't get into it tonight because that's a whole show unto itself, but the vampire superstitions, they wanted to make sure these people were not getting up and not getting out. And the cages, this is a common question, the cages they see, sometimes yes, many times they were made to keep grave robbers out, but on some occasions, there's cages and there's certain chains and different places I've visited, but they're for vampires. They were to keep the person in and not able to get out. Those are certainly way more rare than the cages to where you keep out grave robbers, but they're all fascinating, and the different contraptions that you'll see, and that's all in the book that I've got coming out. It's a very big book, so buckle up. It's going to take a long time to read it. But there were so many contraptions that they made to keep grave robbers out, because that was a real concern. It was, and you've got to think. I mean, how horrible that would be. That's somebody you love and somebody you care for, and then you've got these people rifling the bodies for what they can steal. But even worse, back in the day, you had people that were taking the bodies to use them for experiments and such. And so, it was something that people really had to take in hand and make sure. So certainly you could have people watch, but that only goes so far. Somebody's going to fall asleep, and you can only keep that up for so long. And so they made these cages, and some of them are quite beautiful, that go over the grave to keep, and again, is that going to completely stop somebody? Not if they really want in, no, but it's just something that made them feel better, and they do detour because there's so many other open graves that they could go to. That's going to make it harder for them to get in yours, so maybe they'll pass you by. But that's, I would hate it.
I was going to say there was a real stigma. Yeah, there's a real stigma against donating your body to science in the day. Nowadays, I'm an organ donor, so when I go, if my corneas are great, are looking good, like I want that, I don't feel offended by using anything on me that's usable to help someone else have a better life. I'd be thrilled if my heart's in great shape. You can have it, whatever. Take what you want, use it and let me live on in that manner. But that would have been such a horrifying idea even 120 years ago, because you believed you needed everything on Judgment Day. I mean, there's a grave over in...
I believe that. I still believe that. I am one of the old school people who, I want all my pieces. I am horrified that when I had my second child, I had both of them had C-section, and they took my appendix out it was perfectly healthy. They took it out, and without my consent, which I would not have given, and they said, oh, we were there and we went ahead and took your appendix out because so many people have problems with their appendix. We thought we'll save you that. And I have been so upset because I don't have all my parts now, and so I'm one of those old school people who believes it.
That would bother me too, but maybe not for the same reason. I mean, just because we say that the appendix is vestigial and we don't really need it, we are constantly learning more. We don't know everything. Maybe that has a really cool function that I need. There's some people who I've read where they thought that in the old days we used to actually synthesize vitamin C in our body, and so we didn't have to get it externally from fruits and, vitamin C rich things, and it kept us from getting scurvy. I mean, that's one theory, but I mean, maybe appendix, just because we don't know what the appendix does, I mean, maybe it's doing a lot of stuff. I mean, sorry, you don't have yours. I don't want to make you feel bad. Maybe it really doesn't.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
That would bother me.
And I will get. I've always felt like I was, robbed, right, of my organs.
Yeah,
like what did you do? You took it, and I will still have these phantom pains, but I know I don't have one. So so it's kind of weird. It's an odd thing, but and still to this day, there's people who will. It's not as common by any fraction of what we're talking about, but you do in some places still have to watch some grave robbers who will get in, maybe not necessarily for organs or anything, but to just try to steal or experiment or darker art needs. Thing. So, I was going to say, that used to be, since anatomy, colleges where they studied anatomy, they needed to have bodies, and they needed fresh bodies for that. And there were people called resurrectionists was the name for them, who were body snatchers, and they would go and they would dig people up. You had to be, a fresh body so that students could then study the anatomy. And I mean, nowadays they have people who will volunteer for this. That kind of creeps me out, but whatever, to each their own. But when I talk about this in my book, Understanding Cemetery Symbols, and, I got so much more information about it than I could put in the chapter on it. But one thing that creeped me out was, or I found really interesting, was there were several riots at colleges, at universities over the years, if they suspected that they were doing medical colleges, if they suspected that they were doing dissections. And I read this horrible case, like a man in Ohio who snuck in, he heard a rumor that his daughter had been disappeared from her grave, and he heard a rumor that she was over in a university being used as experiments. It's so horrific. We're gonna give everybody nightmares tonight. And then but I know this was I may need my own flashlight. I wasn't trying to be creepy tonight, but whatever, everybody. Sorry. So he recognized her hand like in a jar or something like this. That's where it's so horrific. And so he went back to his town, and they came back with torches, and they burnt the college. And this was not the only time that this kind of thing happened. And I have heard, now I need to substantiate this before I say it's 100%, but what I've heard from a few different historians is they say that when you go to a college, most colleges have a tower in them. Universities will have a tower, and they were saying part of the function of that tower, this gets me because I grew up in university towns, is that part of the function of that tower was to serve as a lookout in case people were coming to burn your university. Yeah.
I don't know if
that's
true or not,
and that's true for that, and it's also true when you go, back to places where even with the story of Frankenstein, where they would have the high lookouts and things, but it was true. It's true. It's things that you can't imagine, but it really happened. And another thing about is weather. Everybody always has a lot to say about the weather. And there's a funeral superstition about thunder. Rain on your wedding day is a sign of good fortune. But what about rain at your funeral? Well, thunder following a funeral means that a dead person has certainly reached the gates of heaven. And this funeral superstition can be positive or negative depending on the time of the thunder. So we got to get specific about that, right? So although thunder after a funeral signifies that your loved one has reached heaven, thunder during a funeral signifies that he or she can expect a less than pleasant afterlife, that they could not get in the gates. So that's something to think about. Like, well, yeah.
And I heard contradicting stuff, too, with the rain. It was like, it's good if the rain falls on your way to a funeral, but it's bad if the rain falls into an open grave. Well, wouldn't the grave be open while you were driving to the funeral or whatever? And then, it's, you know, like I'd heard that it was good if the thunder happened right after the body was interred, you know. But so, yeah, that is interesting. They kind of, some of these, I love it, because some of the superstitions really do kind of contradict each other.
You know why I think they contradict? I think they contradict because part of you know, self-soothing would be, no matter when it happened, you would want to alter that to say, well, you know, though, well, that's
you're right.
True. Since ours is this is the way it is now, you know? And I think sometimes that's what they do. Like, you know.
Oh, my gosh.
Let's talk about flowers on a loved one's grave. So the act of laying flowers on a grave site has been going on for thousands of years, of course. In ancient Rome, people planted flowers at burial sites because they believed the spirit of their loved one would wander the grave site and enjoy the beauty of all eternity. Cemetery superstition in the 1700s and 1800s dictated that flowers blossomed on the graves of virtuous individuals, while weeds would spread across the graves of the wicked. And once organized cemeteries came into fashion, people continued to leave flowers at their loved one's grave to signify a virtuous life, as well as to help mask the smell of the decomposing body. Flowers are not the only superstitious item left in cemeteries. And this is what we were talking about before. You mentioned when you were talking about your book coming out, that you'll see small stones resting on a grave. And in the Jewish faith, that while flowers are beautiful and a wonderful gift to the living, they mean nothing to the dead. In death, the body is temporary, it's gone, and all that remains is the eternal part of the person, their soul. The body, like a flower, blossoms and fades away, but the soul, solid like a stone, lives on forever in their tradition. So the flowers are not so much common as you'll see stones on the grave to honor the loved ones that are still practiced today. And people, the coins, and certainly everybody's got something that's particular to them and a person, and you'll see that on different graves. But most commonly, it is stones and coins.
Oh, yeah, and I have a chapter about both of those in my grave good books. And it is interesting because pretty much the only grave goods are just the things that you leave at a grave site. And in a Jewish tradition, it does, and Christian tradition, when you leave those stones on a grave site, it refers to a chapter 35, verse 20 in Genesis, and that's when Jacob, after Rachel died, he erects a pillar in her honor at her grave site. So when you're leaving that pebble or stone, you're symbolically building a pillar in your loved one's honor. It's just a respectful way. But I do go into the coins in great detail because there is some urban legends surrounding that I kind of needed to clear the ground about. But yeah, that's an ancient tradition. And then there's kind of a urban legend that's been circulating since 2009 that I kind of had to get into a little bit. But I don't know. I don't want to go on too much about that on here. We could, but yeah. So it is all very fascinating. I noticed that people leave coins a lot on the graves of people who criminals that I've visited their website. What am I saying? Their headstone, like Machine Gun Kelly. I've seen. He always seems to have pennies, and the alleged Jesse James burial in Granbury. There's always coins there, and whenever I've been to someone who's some sort of notorious in some way, it's almost like that old thing about having to pay the ferryman to cross the river Styx. It was like we're a little worried. We're a little concerned about these people who have been less than savory during their life. And
I think part of that, like let's just use Jesse James for an example. Of course, I've been and channeled him unintentionally. You were there in Granbury, but I've been to his actual home, his family home and childhood home in Missouri. And it's beautiful, by the way, everybody. It's amazing. but they, in their own family, have a tradition of the coins. And so when I visited his home, they gave me a coin and as a remembrance of being there. So it was really interesting. And, they let me go through places that are not open to the public. So I got to go through actually his house and his stuff and everything, and it was really amazing. But yeah, and I think, to me, just in my imagination, I always think of, they were they were in it for the money, a lot of times, and they use that money sometimes for good. But I think the coin does go back for maybe the criminals, gangsters, whatever it was, bank robbers, because that's what they were, part of their life doing was for the coin, gold, whatever, and so it's still like a nod to like, hey, here's some coin.
Wow, yeah, that is interesting. Well, I wanted to make sure I had the chance to share my Italian butcher shop story before I forgot.
Yeah, tell us. Yeah, we've still got about 10 minutes, so tell us that and anything else you can share.
Okay, well, there are a lot of superstitions surrounding hearses. I mean, one of them is like you're not supposed to, if you see a reflection in a hearse that doesn't bode well for you. But when I was living in Italy, I was I went to the butcher shop there one day, and when you go to butcher shops in Italy, it's interesting. You go to one that's specifically for chicken, and you go to another one that's just specifically for beef. It's so strange. So I was at the beef butcher shop, for what it's worth. And it was kind of interesting there, too. I was in Naples. And Naples, you might be familiar with it, they have their own card deck. So whenever I would go, and they have a very different pace of life there. It's very old school. So, like, I'd walk into, and I'd have my little, be ready to attempt, they don't speak English there, to try my terrible Italian and order some meat. And so I walk up to the counter, and the butcher, oftentimes he'd be sitting back there playing cards and betting with his buddies using the traditional Neapolitan deck. And so I would just kind of wait, and he'd tell me, hey, wait a minute. I'm like, okay. And then he got up and he came up, but that gave me a chance to pick out what meat I wanted. And so I had just picked out what kind of meat I wanted. He had walked up to the counter. I saw a little money change hands. I don't know. He looked like he was winning because he was smiling. So he walks up to the counter. And then all of a sudden, he just says what sounds like, it's like, Macchina Morte or something like that, like death car. And he's looking at me, and I hear him go, death car. And I'm like, huh? And I thought he was yelling that at me. I'm like, what have I done? I'm terrified momentarily. I haven't even said anything yet. And have I, some terrible faux pas that I've done? And he and another guy leaps up and runs over, and I'm looking really shaken, and they turn off the lights. And they close the curtains to one thing, but they didn't have curtains on the other door. And this other guy, he sees the look on my face, and he starts chuckling, and he tries to tell me that I see this Volvo going by very slowly. And he explains to me that the Volvo, which to me just looks like a Volvo, is a hearse. And I'm like, what? And so then I found out later that the hearse, the traditional hearse down there in Italy, is a Volvo because it's a car that can handle these narrow streets that they have there. Like in America, we have such big roads and such big cars, and hearses are usually these huge vehicles. Like I never would have pegged that thing for a hearse. But when I looked at it a little closer, so I couldn't quite figure it out. And then another time I was getting my hair cut. And this guy was going on, chop, cutting my hair. And all of a sudden I hear, Scheda Morte, Macchina Morte, like death car. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And they flipped the lights off again. And they didn't have curtains. And I just see a Volvo go by. And I'm like, wow. So apparently whenever, I don't know if that's carried over into America at all, maybe on the East Coast. But when a hearse goes by, you shout death car. And then you turn out the lights and no one talks. Too, like you wait until it's by, and then but the first time it happened, I was so rattled. I'm like, what has just happened? Did he lose, the cards? Is something bad going to happen? And yeah, that was my strange encounter.
Wow, that is though. It's a good one.
Yeah, and really, wow, way to leave an imprint on me. It was just like, geez, what? Why do you want to freak out the little American chick? What did I do wrong? I just wanted to get some beef.
Yeah, just coming in for dinner.
Yeah, come on, guys,
whoa. Well, now tell me some of the superstitions you have, if I'm not wrong, about.
Sure,
yeah, tell us.
Oh, Asian ones? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh, God, I'm glad you reminded me. Here, I scroll to the bottom of my notes here because I've probably got way too much stuff. Well, this is interesting. First one I want to talk about is a Japanese graveyard superstition because I had heard this when I was a kid living in Virginia. I did live in a university town, but I didn't think it was particularly Asian. It was like if you went by a graveyard, you were supposed to tuck your thumbs into your fists to protect your family. Now, I thought that was the weirdest thing, and I'd kind of forgotten about it. But then I read that, and this is interesting, in Japan, when a hearse goes by or you go by a cemetery, you're supposed to tuck your thumb into your fist. And they have a reason for it, because in Japanese, the word for thumb literally means parent finger. And so by shielding your parent finger, you're then protecting your parents from an untimely death. So I thought that was a really unusual one. And I don't know why I somehow heard it in Virginia, but I did when I was a little kid. And that was, who knows. Now, the other thing that
I haven't heard that one.
You had? Yeah, see, I don't, and this is very strange. I don't remember. Maybe I had a Japanese friend at the time. I'm not sure. But the other one is that some Chinese superstitions. Now, April 4th or 5th, it kind of varies each year. It's kind of like Easter, how it could be on different days. They have Tomb Sweeping Day in China, Hong Kong, Taiwan. And this is a time, it's actually a national holiday. And this is when families travel to their grave sites, and their grave sites are very family-oriented. So even you might they shut the country down, so that people can make a big, long trek and go to their family ancestral cemetery. And they really think that cemeteries are very lively places. Like, there are spirits roaming around, and you have to keep them happy. Like, you have to bring food and incense. And they do stuff like, when I used to work in Chinatown, and I used to see this stuff called hell money. And it looks like counterfeit money, Asian currencies. But I asked, like, the shop owner, what is this for? Is this for kids to play with? And he was like, oh, no. You buy this, and then you go and you burn it at the grave of your ancestors for them to spend in heaven, or keep them from going to hell. It's like hell money. You burn it. And, like, so they will burn hell money at the grave site, and they will, have foods that they like to try and keep those spirits happy. They have a superstition where they will wear a willow twig on their heads. That's supposed to keep ghosts away. And they also have special herbs that you're supposed to make dumplings with that you eat at the grave site, things like that. This was interesting. I thought some traditional activities they have for Tomb Sweeping Day, they'll do tug of war and swinging on swings. Now, I don't know where the swings are located, but I've never seen a swing set in a cemetery. I think that would be quite an addition. So, yeah, those were a few other cultures. I know that most of the ones I'm familiar with tend to be the ones that, from Europe, the things that we brought across the pond with us, because those are the things a lot of the things that kind of trickled into America. But it is interesting. I do go to some Asian cemeteries sometimes, and I have seen some interesting ashes that could have been burnt hell money. Things like that.
They very much, like you said, believe that they are still influencing everything, and that spirits are connected to everything, even toasters. I did a whole show on that. Everything, even inanimate objects, can have something associated with them, and it's a constant thing to be making sure everything's good and everything's flowing well, and you want to appease everything to make it okay. So yeah, that's a true thing. For sure. Yeah, well, I can't believe we're almost out of time, and it's gone by so quickly. It doesn't even feel like we've been on here an hour for sure. But thank you so much for coming on. We could go on and on about this because it's both of us think it's a fascinating subject, and it is, and a popular one. But before we run out of time, let everybody know again how they can reach you and how they can get that special early bird special on your book.
So if you want to get the early bird special on my book, Grave Goods, just head over to Amazon.com, type Grave Goods, maybe Snider, no Y in it, it's an I, into the search engine. It should come up. You'll see a book, Grave Goods. There's also a link, I think, right from the Blog Talk page. And I have Also, I just remembered, I have a link from the Blog Talk page, I think, that goes, if you would like a free book about all the different things that hands can mean, because on headstones, you can see hands, and they can mean sacrifice, they can mean sudden death, they can mean marriage, it can even mean you're a member of a secret society, and it's just all from different things, the way that hands are shown on headstones. And so I have a whole little mini book that you can have for free if you go follow that link. But on that link you can find from my website. So I would say go to tealisnider.com and just check out all the fun and games I got there and have fun. I think a good trip to your local country cemetery is a good way to practice social distancing right now. So that's what I'm doing, enjoying the history and the mystery and the fun and excitement of cemeteries. And thanks again for having me on your show, Teal. It's always a blast.
Oh, I had a great time, and I look forward to seeing, what's going to happen in our adventures in Superstitious Texas Mysteries. Those are going to be some fun books. So, everybody, thank you for joining us. I know it's going to be so fun. And we will be back same time next week. And everybody have a blessed time. Goodbye, everybody.